We're really excited to have our presentation, Tara, here with us, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. I do want to just kind of spend a little bit of time just going through some announcements, some things that are happening in our chapter, and then we'll go from there. So the first thing is we've been having some socials in the Boise area. We have our fourth Thursday social coming up in Eagle, and then on the 7th, another one will be in Boise. Look for information about the Utah social that's being planned out for Utah as well. That we'll be sending out that announcement once that gets completely organized. So we're really excited to begin to have these socials again and get to know each other face to face and so on and so forth. So we're really excited about that. We also have a new member orientation that's happening on March 24th as well. Again, this will be a virtual orientation, and it's for any new members that's joined our chapter basically since July. If you've joined or if you've never been to a new hire orientation and you want to, it's a great place to get to know some people within the chapter. It's it's a lot more informal than what these Friday sessions are, but Chris and Kimberly, our membership co-chairs, will kind of orient you to the chapter and what's happening and a lot of fun stuff that goes on there. Also in our April program, we have Tina Myrtle. She'll be talking about the relational presence for coaches. And just a note, this session will not be recorded. So if you do want to see this presentation, definitely attend this session in April. I can't believe it, but we're in that transition to have a new board join us in June. And so looking for people who are willing to serve on the board. Amber Houston, who is our president-elect, she is putting together what that new board would look like for 22 into 23. And so if you are interested in serving on the board with the different positions that we have, and she's still gathering as far as what opportunities are available, she definitely reach out to her at president-elect@icfhighcountry.org. And if you're interested, she will be reaching out to you and let you know about what is available for the new board. Some people are staying on, some people are moving on, and we've definitely appreciated their service to the board and all their hard work. So please reach out to Amber if you have any questions or want to help out with that. That'd be great. So just to note that earning the CCEUs, Stacy will be putting in a link to a survey at the end of the session today. It will also be emailed out to you. Be sure that you complete that survey. That's how we know that you attended, and then also know of who to send those CCEUs out to, and then you can upload that into the ICF Global website. And so it's $25 for non-members, but it's free for those of you that are chapter members. As usual, at the end of our session today, we will have a breakout session, just a network and introduce each other. Where are you at? Where are you from? Or where are you at from? Same thing, basically. And then there will be a question to discuss that I will put into the chat right as we go into those breakout rooms based upon what we learned today. So with that, I am really excited to introduce our speaker today, Tara Butler-Flock. She is known as the coach's coach. She worked as a sales and marketing executive for 3 global companies. And managing teams of up to 80 people. And then in 2000, she started her own coaching and training program where she has helped hundreds of entrepreneurs level up their business. And she has used her deep knowledge of business development, marketing, branding to help hundreds of clients really define their niche. And whatever that niche would be, to make a greater impact on their clients, transform and grow their business, and also create that meaningful, passionate practice of ideal clients. And as we were chatting just before we welcome everybody, she says, you know, it's helping to create that practice for the coaches that they love living in and love being in. So her mission is to widen her ripple effect in the world by helping great coaches build their business and help even more people transform their lives. And so with that, I will turn it over to Tara.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I love coming to talk to ICF chapters, and what's really cool and looking around the room is you're all new faces to me. So it's really nice to meet all of you. I'm excited to talk with you today about getting to a powerful yes, as I call it, and how to. This is really about how to powerfully enroll clients at any time, but certainly most particularly in an uncertain world, which we clearly are in. Just when we think things are going to be back to normal, we always keep getting curveballs sent our way. And, you know, with every challenge, there's an opportunity. But certainly our clients have never needed coaching more. There's so much that people are holding in their lives that they need help with moving through. A lot of difficulty with the pandemic and now the war, and how that's impacted people's lives and their businesses and their organizations and their leadership. So I'm curious, I want to hear a little bit about what challenges your ideal clients are having right now. That's really what we're going to be focusing on today, is how do we really build up our practice to address the challenges our ideal clients have. So that's one of the things I want you to be thinking about as you look to the future, is like, what do my clients need from me now? How has that shifted in the last few years? So feel free to share in the chat. It's a little bit of a rhetorical question for you to be marinating in, but I'd love to also see anything in the chat that you'd like to share. I'm going to make sure I can see the chat. There we go. All right. So as I said, our clients need us more than ever. Sometimes it feels like, gosh, you know, we keep building the bridge and then rebuilding the bridge and rebuilding the bridge. And it's like, well, maybe we just need to take a different route. So I'm curious, you know, it's really interesting because working with professional coaches and also talking with professional coaches all the time, it's really interesting to see how these times have affected their business. So I'm curious, we don't have an official poll, so I'd love to have you put it in the chat. You know, what best describes your business now? Are you busier than ever? Are you about as busy, but you're having to, you know, shift around a bit? Have you seen a decrease, or has your business plummeted as a result of all that's been going on? All right, we've got a bunch of different responses here coming in. Some say it's plummeting, some say it's decreased, some are just starting out, bumping along. Let's see, increased, but then decreased. Yeah, and that's what I'm seeing that too, that there's some ups and downs too, because, you know, part of this is understanding also, like, individuals, but also companies, you know, they really try to look to the future to know what they want to invest in today. And that future, that you know, that point keeps changing. You know, it's like just when we think we have a plan, and it's just a really interesting time for humans, because especially in the Western culture, we are such forward thinkers. You know, we talk about the way that we do goals and business planning is that we're always looking out and trying to forecast what's going to happen and how we can close the gap between where we are and where we want to be. And essentially, that's what coaching really helps support our clients do, is to bridge that gap. And we're going to talk about that today. But there is this sense that that bridge keeps changing. So another thing I'm curious about as we dive into this is, okay, how would you describe your ability to enroll the right prospects? Now, this is not attracting them. That's a different class. But once they have been introduced to you, or once they reach out to you, once you have a great conversation and you invite them, how skilled are you at enrolling them? So number one, I've mastered this. I feel really confident. Most the people I really want to work with are almost always a yes. A two is I'm good at enrolling, but I don't know that they're ideal clients. So I'm good at getting yeses, but I'm not always happy with, the engagement, or there's a lot of realignment that needs to happen, or it just feels like I'm pretty busy, but I'm not really loving my client load the way I should. I love talking to prospects, but I spend too much time, and I know I should get more yeses. And then number four is I struggle. All right, I already see some great answers in here. And we have some people all across the board. And one thing I will say is, hopefully, even those who feel like they've mastered it, you're going to walk away with some nuggets that will really help you be even more successful in identifying whether it's the right client for you. Not only have them say yes, but really have it be that mutual full lean on, that powerful yes, not just for them, but for you. And for those of you who are 2, 3, or 4, I think you're going to get a ton out of our time today. Okay, so first of all, one of the things that I want to be really clear about is enrollment is really about being in service, because, and I'll talk about this in a second, but really at the end of the day, when we show up for our clients in service without an expectation on the back end, that is when we really shine. That's when we show our fullest selves and what's possible for us as a coach. So I want you to really think that these are basically to be in service to people, right? Don't think of them as sales calls. And believe me, I have nothing against sales. I used to be in sales, so I love sales. And this is something altogether different. And really why I share that is because so much of this is about energy, and the energy that we hold. When we hold, gosh, I really, really need this client, that comes across. And part of that is that we have these things, I don't know how much y'all know about neuroscience, but we have these things right here in our brain called mirror neurons. And what they do is they're sort of our energy meters. And some of us are really conscious of that, and really trust that. And other people it's like the subtle unconscious thing, and they can't put their finger on it, but they just have this feeling. So how clean we are with our energy, and the energy that we hold, and the mindset that we're holding, really does in fact affect how we're perceived, and how these calls or meetings, what the outcomes will be. So really at the end of the day, if you get nothing else, is to remember that whatever energy you're being is going to be very clear to the client, whether it's conscious or unconscious to them. So, one thing you might want to do is, as an example, is practice some grounding exercises before your calls to really get yourself into the right energy. And, I always say, one of my mentors was Henry Kimsey House, who was one of the co-founders of the Coaches Training Institute. And Henry used to talk about this concept of abundant expectancy. And really what that is, it's a hard concept for humans, but it's to be really clear about what you want and to be unattached. And usually we are really clear what we want and are attached, or we're afraid that we're going to be attached, so we don't really allow ourselves to be clear about what we want. So it's absolutely okay to be like, I want this to be a great opportunity to have a new client. And I really hope that that's what this call produces. And to remember that our attachment to that will get us wrapped around the axle. So let's talk a little bit about sort of push versus pull. As I said, I'm not opposed to sales, but sales really works well when there's a square peg and a square hole, that there's, here are the features and benefits, and these are this is exactly what you want, boom. And not that that can't happen in coaching, and we sometimes see this on an organizational level when we sell a coaching program, as an example, into an organization. But with that said, it's making assumptions that we know what it is that they need. And enrollment is really when you pull people towards you, right? Sales is kind of like, here's why we're great, here's the benefit of what we do, and you should buy it, essentially. Versus enrollment, which is really paying attention to what's happening and pulling that person towards you by being an active listener and really seeing what it is that they need in that moment. And it doesn't mean that you don't have a program that you put people into, but to be really looking for, how be an active listener and not try to be pushing yourselves on people. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes I see people make. I think it's also a big mistake that coaching schools do, is that they tell people to, give free sessions and then like, okay, hey, you want to work with me? And that really is a push, and sometimes it works, but it's not the most effective way to draw clients to us. And we want people to be leaning in with us, because when they're leaning in with us, we don't have to sell them. And so what I'm going to be talking about today will illustrate that when you have the right conversation, they're asking you, how can I work with you? Not you saying, so you want to work with me? You won't need to do that with the right client when they're leaning in with you. And you'll also feel when they're not leaning in with you. And again, don't be attached, right? To realize that this is somebody who's not really leaning in, and they're not going to make an ideal client if they're not. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I love getting discussions going. So if anything I'm just sharing, you have some thoughts, please share them. And if you have any questions along the way, please, 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 I'd love to hear them. So what's this je ne sais quoi of client enrollment, right? When does it happen? Now, first of all, the client feels seen and heard. That's one of the things that is so beautiful about coaching, is that it's one of the few places in our lives where we really are seen and heard and held. And if we do that for prospects, it is hugely powerful, even if they don't choose to work with us for some reason. But it's definitely a way for them to feel pulled towards you. They also are emotionally and intellectually engaged and are committed to taking action. So, it's not just about this makes sense for me, but they actually feel that emotional pull towards doing this work. And and you can see and feel, as well as the words, that they are committed. And this is, one of the things that's going to be one of the nuances of this, is to notice the energy from them, for you to start paying attention to the energy of them, and not just listening to their words, but really listening to the energy of it. Because there are a lot of people that say they're committed because they know they should say they're committed, but you can feel that they're hesitant or they're not completely there. And this is a great opportunity to get curious about what's happening there. But make sure that if you're not really feeling the commitment, they will not make a great client. Now it can make you curious, you can have a conversation, you can get over that hump sometimes, but it's really important that you feel a strong commitment from your clients before you begin. So commitment is huge. Also, your coaching process or services meets their needs. I've had a long history because I've had my business since 2000, and I used to do leadership coaching in organizations, and I also for a while used to coach financial advisors in my past lives, right? But I don't anymore. So when I was focused on that, I had tools and resources and different things that really met the needs of those people. Now, if they came knocking on my door today, I would refer them to one of my fabulous clients, because really my process today and my services really don't match to that. And just because I can doesn't mean I should. This is why garage sales work. Somebody else's treasure is somebody else's sort of junk, or something they're ready to let go of is somebody else's treasure. And to know that it's really in service to have people working with people that are super excited to work with them and have the tools and resources to help those people really with great transformation. All right, back to client enrollment. So you both feel that you can make a significant difference with the potential client. Now, there are going to be times that you really feel it and they don't. And there are going to be times, especially when you get really good at this, that they're leaning in with you, but you're not leaning back. And just to remember that it's not in service. I always say, if it doesn't serve you, it doesn't serve. And if you're not super excited to work with somebody, I always say, like, if it's not a powerful yes, it's really a no. So you want to make sure both of you feel that you can make a difference. Also, they have to feel you're credible and trustworthy. Sorry, my chat box is blocking. There's this, what I call the trust, know, and like factor, right? If we really want people to be vulnerable with us, they need to like us, they need to enjoy our company. And trust and credibility is huge. People won't be vulnerable with us if that isn't there. So all of that needs to be there. And that's one of the things from a niche standpoint for you to really be thinking about is, am I focusing on an ideal client where I know I have credibility and trustworthiness? And lastly, there's a powerful committed yes for both of you. Any questions coming up, please put them in the chat. All right, so, at the end of the day, successful client engagements are what I call an equal energy exchange. Money is a form of that, but at the end of the day, it really has to feel, for coaches to be satisfied and to be coaching somebody, you want that equal energy exchange. And this is one of those things that I think is important for you to think about is, are there clients that I have where I don't feel that equal energy exchange? Are there clients that I have when I see them on my calendar that I'm like, I got to meet with that person today? And you have to muster it up to show up. And usually what I find with my clients is that those relationships, it's because they have to work too hard, because they're not really giving, right? And I always say it's a big red flag if we feel we're working hard as coaches. There should be a lot of ease for us in the coaching conversation. If there's not ease, that's something to, get out your magnifying glass and take a look at that. Like, why am I working so hard? And usually it's because they're expecting too much of you and they're not fully committed and they're not doing the work that they need to do for your powerful coaching to work. So we want to have, and I believe this is true for all relationships, coaches, there's just a way that from an archetype standpoint that we really love that symbiotic relationship. And we want that with our strategic alliances. We want that with our friends. We want to be giving as, even though we're givers, we want to make sure that if we're giving, we're also receiving in some way. Okay. So I don't know if any of you know Ursula. Her and her partner have a fabulous advanced coaching program called Be Above Leadership, which is really around neuroscience and using tools in neuroscience to help, in the coaching process to help get deeper transformation. Their courses are fantastic. So just a little advertisement for Ursula. And she's been a coach even longer than me. And when she started to use this format and create her own customized template using this format, it had a huge impact on her business because people were more committed. And here's the thing too, if people aren't that committed, they're not going to see the value. And what usually happens is people artificially have their prices lower than they should be. I see this with people all the time where they're like, well, if I raise my prices, then I get too many no's. And it's like, well, because you haven't powerfully enrolled them, that they really see the value. And it's okay, not everybody sees our value. And that's all right. We're not here to coach the world. We're here to coach a group of committed people that we can make a big difference with. But part of this is you will be able to charge more when you know how to enroll powerfully. And I'm a big fan, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I am not about, I'm all about fair pricing. But what I often see with coaches is that they undercharge because they can't get yeses otherwise. So, in Ursula's case, even with all her experience, she not only increased her practice, but she raised her prices to really where she should be given her experience level. And it was really profound for her. So that's what I want for all of you. And I know that some of you are newer on the journey. And isn't this great, because you get to start out even more powerfully? But those of you who are experienced, I really think that you're still going to get some great nuggets on how to do this most effectively. So let's go ahead and dive in. First of all, I call them breakthrough sessions, but we'll talk about what to name them, and to choose a name that is a powerful name, not just call it, a complimentary session, to name it powerfully. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But essentially, what we do in these conversations is look at where they are now, where they want to be, and look at how, what's the gap there and what potentially can bridge that gap, the cost of that gap to people, and the sort of transformation if that gap is filled. And people will walk away with value no matter what. They will walk away with huge clarity about what's most important to them and what's getting in their way. And so what's really cool about this is that it will be very valuable for people, whether they choose to work with you or not. And so sometimes when we, call it a enrollment call or something like that, people already have to be committed to show up for that call. And not that, everybody's going to shift on a dime, but that is a big obstacle for a lot of people because they're not sure. A lot of people know they want more in their life, but they're not sure coaching is going to be the right solution for them. And by doing this, you also demonstrate for them. So Becky has a question. Does that create confusion for the client thinking that they're receiving coaching versus finding out more about the services and how you help? I will go into that, Becky, because the first part of the session is really about examining the gap, finding the gap. And then if you're both leaning in, then you'll talk about working with them. One of the things that I think is one of the tragedies really of this work is when people call up and say, so how do you help people and what's it cost? When they don't know the value that you are. So if they don't know the value that you are, that's just a real subjective thing. And so as an example, if somebody's not leaning in with me, I don't tell them about how much my services are or how I work, because it's just going to be more evidence in the basket for them that I can't afford that. Usually they come back with something like, I can't afford that or whatever. It's really, they don't value it because they're not there yet, right? So first of all, we don't want to share, too much about the way we work with people unless we know they're really leaning in. So that's my philosophy. Of course, take that if that resonates, but hopefully, Becky, when you see how this unfolds, you'll see the value in that for you. And how to, and let's circle back to that. If I don't address kind of that question for you, please, pipe up a little later. So what is it? So first of all, it's a complimentary 30-minute session initially, right? To create clarity about what they really want it paints the gap between where they are and where they want to be, explore some strategies to bridge those gaps. And as I said, they'll get value no matter what. Their commitment level will be clear. And this is not to working with you. This is to bridging the gap. How committed are they to this transformation? Because if they're not committed to it, it doesn't, I would say they would not make a very good client. And then if it feels like a potential fit, you'll spend more time exploring working together. So basically you'll tell people this up front, like we'll spend at least 30 minutes together. And, if we get to the 30 minutes and it doesn't feel like a potential fit that we want to explore, I will bless you on your journey and you'll get value. And if you're leaning in, we'll talk more about what that looks like for you and I potentially working together. There are also times that you get to this point where you're not leaning in and you don't think it's the right fit for you, even if they're leaning in. So I always book 60 minutes for these, but I set the expectation. We'll spend 30 minutes and then we'll spend extra time. And if they are leaning in and we want to explore that, and if not, we'll end at 30 minutes so that we have it reserved so you can have the space to have that conversation, but you're not giving them a free 60-minute session necessarily. So here are some things that some of my clients have called their sessions. You want to make it specific, like a leadership boost session or a wellness boost session as an example. I just encourage you to have these 4 elements in your name, which is have it be descriptive, like have them kind of get what it is. Have it evoke movement or action, because that's really what coaching is about. It's about deepening the learning and forwarding the action. I always say coaching is, unless it has those two things weaved together, it's not coaching. It's reflective of the value and it's alluring, intriguing, inspiring. So think about that. I encourage you to pick a name that really has all 4 of those things. And usually what I find with coaches is that it's often descriptive, but it's not usually alluring or inspiring. So there are ways to do both, even if you're corporate focused. So what I'm going to share with you today is a flexible framework that has 5 different types of questions that you ask. And in this scenario, the client does most of the talking, but it leads them on a journey that essentially gets you to that place of whether this gap is something that they're really committed to filling, and if both of you are excited and leaning in to working together to fill that gap. What's interesting about this, and there's a lot of nuances, is that it's basically in order, but sometimes you might back up, right? If you talk about an issue and then the implication, you might go back and talk about another issue and another implication. Sometimes you get to commitment questions and more issues come up. So you ask some more issue questions. So, and it might, just like with anything, it has an order, but you want to be flexible with it and make sure that you're really, tapping into the heart of this through your deep listening as a coach. So I'm going to walk you through this framework, and really essentially what you want to do is customize this framework for your ideal client and for you and the work that you do with them. So background questions. A lot of these you also could ask in advance. This is also really helpful. I always say, before you give your time to somebody, make sure that, there is the potential for a round peg, round hole. You don't want to meet with somebody and then realize like, oh gosh, I am right out of the gate that you're not the right coach for them. You can, if you know what some background stuff, it will help you see if it's worth your time and energy and their time and energy to meet. And you can also refer to somebody else if you're not the right fit. So what are some of those background questions that you want to ask that will help you ascertain whether meeting will be valuable, and to get a sense of sort of their starting point? So I have some examples here. I have a free workbook that you can get. I'll be putting the link in at the end. And it has lots of different sample questions that you can customize to give you a sense of what to ask. So some of these you might ask in advance, and some you might ask to sort of set the stage for your conversation. I always encourage you to ask if they've ever had a coach before and what that experience was like. That's very helpful to have a sense of, you know, where they are and what they're expecting. I also think it's great to ask them, like, why now? You know, what brought you here today? And there might be some background that they share with you about what has led them here. And also that question is a great question to ask that sort of slides into the next piece. So Stacy asks, what if the person had a bad experience with a coach before? This is a great time to be curious, because, you know, I've had bad experiences with coaches before. It doesn't mean that it turned me off to coaching. It didn't mean that I was a bad client. It just was not a good fit. So one of the things you want to do is just get really curious about the situation to find out if it's a red flag for you, like, ooh, you know, this person's going to be difficult to coach potentially, or to get a sense of what didn't work for them, to try to see if your style is going to also rub them the wrong way or be a much better fit. One thing I have to say is that almost all my clients have worked, all my clients have worked with coaches before. I work with professional coaches, but almost all of them have worked with some sort of business or marketing coach, and most of them were not happy with that experience. They got some nuggets out of it, and part of that is that a lot of business and marketing coaches really don't understand professional coaches, and particularly corporate focused professional coaches. So, there's a lot to learn from that about what, because so when they share what their experience was, I can either be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Or, this might be a little bit of a flag on the field for me. Okay, then you go into, so Becky says, yes, and they might be experienced non-ICF coaches who are actually coaching, but mentoring. And there is a huge spectrum, out there, from pure coaching to people who call themselves coaches that aren't coaches at all, that are really doing training and telling people what to do. And there is a lot in between. And that's part of your journey too, is to figure out where you are on that spectrum. And there are a lot of different styles of coaching too. So sometimes, as an example, back in the day when I was working with a CEO, he's like, I really appreciate you asking me all these questions, but I really need some help with answers. So sometimes your ideal client really needs more, needs a blend. So that's something, in terms of your ideal client, is knowing where your sweet spot is. So yes. All right, let's get back to this: issues and desire questions. So, what are their struggles? What are their challenges? What are their pain points? And one thing you want to really do is start with those. We have this thing as coaches, is that we're always future focused. We're always optimists. And we tend to focus on what people want. And what's really interesting about this is that if you start with a desire question, they usually start with their struggles, challenges, and pain points. So experiment with this. When you do this, experiment with it, and you'll see that when you ask people what they want, they usually start with what they don't want or what's getting in the way from what they want. So start with what are some of the challenges. If they, it's good for them for you to know, like, what brought them here. It's like, oh, I really am struggling as a leader, and I really want some support, right? And you could say, okay, tell me a little bit about your struggles and challenges and pain points. Or they might say, I want to be the best leader possible. And you can say, great, So tell me, what are some of the challenges that you have and are experiencing that keeps you from being the great leader you desire to be? All right, so you can mix these together. Make sure you hit both of them. And this is going to help you paint the gap, right? Here's where they are. Here's where they want to be. Here are some of the obstacles and challenges in the way, and it's going to help you see the lay of the land. Implication questions. These are typically where you get that emotional pull. You'll really see what's the impact of this, right? Because on the surface, you can probably make some assumptions on like, wow, that's a big gap. That must be hard, right? But we don't really know until we explore that with people. And this is actually a place where people can really strengthen their commitment and realize how important this is to them in their lives. And that is a very important thing in their enrollment process, is to really have them feel, not just understand on a logical level, but really feel how this is holding them back. What their lives, how different their lives would be if they were to overcome these challenges, and really can help solidify for you and for them about their commitment and like what's really there. So don't skip over implications, because it's, and of course you want to make sure that it's not, I think one of the things that has people kind of bow away from implication questions is that they're afraid that it seems like they're trying to emotionally manipulate people. So again, this is an energy thing, really being curious about the implications of the challenges they're experiencing, and, having your compassion itself show up for that, because it can be a really beautiful moment. And then commitment questions. You may at this point feel that person's commitment, and oftentimes before you even get to commitment questions, they're already, if they're leaning in, already saying, well, okay, how do I work with you? Do not skip this, because I think it's a really important one, because it shows that you are committed to only working with people who are committed. And that shows a lot of integrity. It also shows that you're discerning about who you want to work with. And I think that really evens the playing field here in that equal energy exchange. And what's really interesting about this question is that sometimes you think someone's going to be an 8, 9, or 10, and they say a 5. And sometimes you think they're going to be a 5 and they say an 8, 9, or 10. So this is a place where don't just pay attention to the number, pay attention to the energy, be curious. Don't just take this at face value unless it really feels in alignment. And if they're, I always say, if they're not an 8, 9, or 10, get curious with them. So there's some people that will just never say they're a 10, because that's just not, some people are just not 10 people, right? They'll never label themselves as a 10. There's some people that will say, I'm a 12, but if somebody says they're a 7, get curious and say, well, what's the gap for you between 7 and 10? Like, what's happening? And sometimes, make sure that you're really understanding what the commitment is and what's getting in the way of their commitment. And this is also a great opportunity for some coaching that can actually help them shift their commitment. Because oftentimes when you get to this question, people get scared, right? Oh my gosh, what if I mess up? What if I spend all this money and I don't make the change, right? There's a lot of things that can come up for people when it comes to commitment. So you don't want to skip over this, and you want to make sure that people really are committed. And if they're not committed, work with them to see if their saboteurs are showing up, or if they're just not ready. Sometimes they're just not ready. Becky says, oh, I love the gap between 7 and 10. Awesome. Oh, and this is important too, because I see that Chris said, yeah, sometimes people are told to go get coaching from their organization. I'm having a a hard time like scrolling with this. I've encountered lower numbers more often in the corporate world where they're being told to get coaching. Yeah, and this is a great opportunity to dive into that with them. Like, what does it cost you to, you're told to get coaching. Was it costing you to, not move forward with it? Or, get curious about where's the disconnect between, what your boss thinks and what you think, right? And sometimes people are just not coachable. I have some clients who their ideal client are those folks that are like on the brink of getting fired. And a lot of my clients are like, heck no, never want to coach somebody like that, right? So you want to make sure that the commitment level that they have aligns with you. And, some people are willing to take that chance that they're, you want to make sure they're committed to themselves, but it's no fun for most of my clients to coach people who are required to get a coach, right? Okay. John said he takes 7 out of the scale because he thinks it's mushy and meaningless. That's interesting. Cool. I'm having a hard time scrolling, so I don't know if you guys can see when I.
Tara.
Yeah.
There was a question from Gina right before, and she said, how can you know if it's the saboteur or just not ready?
Yeah, well, this is where the energy piece, thank you. That's why I had to expand the chat because it wasn't letting me scroll back to that. Yeah, this is where you have to listen to your intuition and what's going on with your mirror neurons. Like, does it feel like a saboteur? Or does it feel like their true self? And you can, dive into that. You can say, does that feel like it's true with a capital T? What's true about that and what's not true about that for you? I also want to say that this is a great opportunity to show up as a powerful coach, because if somebody says a number that surprises me, I will tell them, wow, that surprises me because I was figuring you would say this. So I'm curious about that disconnect, because it felt really to me that you were like at this level. And if somebody says they're a 10 and I did not feel it, I absolutely call that out, because there's some people that they've been conditioned to say that they're committed and push through with things that they're really not fully committed to. And it could be a great opportunity for them to realize where are the places in your life that you say yes when it's not really a powerful yes for you, and that actually can make them more committed to actually doing the work. So does that answer your question, Gina? Let me know if you have any follow-up questions about that, because I know the saboteur work can be a tricky business. I love saboteur work.
He said, thank you.
Thanks. All right. So then last but not least is resolution questions. Now, first and foremost, one thing I want to say is that at any time, you can make the decision that this conversation is not going to lead into a powerful yes. So you might get to implications and realize this person is not really there. Like that might happen with like people that have been referred to you and told that they should get a coach, right? And you have a conversation, you ask them about their challenges and their desires, and very little is showing up, which is usually part of why they're being told to get a coach, is that their self-awareness about what's really happening and what's really happening is out of alignment. But with that said, at any time along this, you may decide this is not a powerful yes for me. It's not going to be a powerful yes for them. And the one thing I would say is make sure they walk away with value, because that is what you committed to. And we want to be of service. But don't keep going down this road if you know it's not going to be a yes. That doesn't serve anybody. So if you get to implications and you're like, I can feel that this person isn't committed, just make sure that they've gotten value out of the conversation. Maybe ask them some coaching questions that helps them get clear about bridging the gap and all of that, and say, and be truthful with them. You know, from what I'm seeing, there's not a huge gap here to bridge, and I really only want to work with people that I can make a significant difference with. And you know, from my perspective, it doesn't look like you're really wanting to go on a major transformation, and good for you. But it doesn't make sense to work with me given that. So people will really respect that. In fact, I've gotten referrals from people that I said a powerful no to because I was generous with them, I was honest with them, and they respected that. So feel free at any time. If this is not feeling like it's going in the right direction, don't feel like you have to keep going down this path. But if it's still a yes, you know, as you find yourself leaning in and you feel them leaning in, keep going. And when you get to this point, you hear commitment, you're both leaning in, that's when you can ask a resolution question. This is often a time where people all of a sudden, they'll be really great at asking questions, and they'll get to this point and they'll say, well, it sounds like you'd be a great fit to work with me. So can I tell you about how I work? Right? And even though that's a question, it's not really a resolution question. So make sure you stay in curiosity and make sure that you're pulling them to you and that you're not suddenly swapping and pushing yourself on them, right? So given what we've talked about today, if I could help you with and outline what they've just shared, you know, about their challenges and desires. If I could help support you in strengthening your leadership skills and being a bolder communicator with your team and standing up to your boss and ... and helping you really on this leadership journey, is that something you'd want to talk with me about further? Right? Nothing salesy about that. And listen to the energy here as well, because sometimes people say, sure. And that is not a real powerful yes. And you don't want to waste your breath talking about how you work with people if they're not really leaning in. And so it's also a good opportunity to call them on that too, if you are so bold, and to say, well, that doesn't sound like a powerful yes. I'm curious about that. You know, because I don't want to talk to you about working together if you're really not leaning in with me. So it's totally okay. I give you full permission to say, this isn't really for me. And usually people really respect that. So don't move forward, because what will happen, and like I said a little bit earlier, that if they say, sure, and you're really not feeling like they're leaning in, you will be wasting your breath. And then your saboteur is going to come in and say things like, you know, because they'll then have some excuses on why. Like, oh, that sounds great, but you know, it's really not in my budget right now. Or, you know, they'll say a bunch of things that have some, you know, element of truth, but they aren't really the truth. And then your saboteur is going to have a field day with that. So this is an opportunity for you to really, you know, I'm big into the powerful yes and the powerful no, and encouraging people to make powerful choices. And you can even set the context of this conversation in that way, you know, because I think it's an opportunity for the world when people make powerful choices and don't just kind of go along with things. One thing with the resolution questions too is, you know, you want to ask them, okay, great. What do you need to know to make a powerful decision on whether to work with me or not? And keep asking the question until they say, you know what, this sounds great, I'm in. Or, wow, this sounds great, I just need to talk to my husband about this. And sometimes that's what it is. It's like, what else do you need to know? And it could be, I need to talk to my boss, or I need to talk to my spouse, or I need to think about it. And that's okay, but keep asking the question until you kind of get the answers that they need to decide, like, are we moving forward? Or are we not moving forward? in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean that they're powerful yes to work with you in this moment. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about like follow-up and all that stuff too. But one thing to really understand about us as humans is most of us only invest in things we value. And even if the company is paying for it, this is a big commitment of time and energy for a leader. And they likely won't want to invest in that unless there's a huge, clear value for them. So it's really, our job is to help them see and make the connection between the work that you do and the services that you do and how that helps with the transformation they're looking for in their life, in their business, in their leadership, in their health, whatever kind of coach that you are. Sometimes it's a combination of those things. And do know that you can't charge a premium for your services if you don't create that clear value in these conversations. All right, so I'm going to pause and see what questions you have so far. I still have some additional content as well, but I just want to see what are your thoughts on the BICRA process and template?
Hi, Tara. This is Chris.
Yes, Chris.
It just, I think there's so much good stuff in there, and I've written a whole bunch of stuff down here because it's going to be really valuable. But it struck me that this is going to create a great framework as well, assuming you get to the powerful yes. So there's so many questions in here that don't only apply in the enrollment phase, but you can actually use and apply as you actually go through the whole coaching process. I think you're already creating that value and value for me as a coach, but also in the process you're creating value for that client. So I really like the approach. I like the beaker, however you say it. It's a good framework. Thank you for explaining that.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear that, Chris. And yeah, so what's beautiful about this too is that you already have a framework of what, as you go into your initial paid intake session, you already have a framework of the things that are most important for them to work on. And of course, it's not going to be complete, but you already have a sense. And what's helpful about that too is that you can go into your intake with certain tools, or you might have them do certain pre-work. If they're talking about, I'm just going to make something up, like they're talking about how they're challenged with difficult conversations and conflict. Like I really have issues with conflict and showing up powerfully as a leader and being truthful and blah, blah, blah. Between now and the time you have your intake, you might actually put some materials together for them. You might have some questions or some things that they do for pre-work that help you get more clear about that area as an example. So it's very useful in setting the stage for the relationship too. So Todd asks, what would be an example of creating clear value you have heard or used? Well, this is the thing, Todd, is that this whole conversation is about creating value, right? So, and at this point, it's not your job to say, this is how I create value for you, right? But one of the things that you will see, and it's important for you to make the connection with what they said, does my process and how I work with my clients going to help them bridge this gap? Am I going to create clear value? Do I create clear value? Because that's a question for you to look at and be honest with, right? If somebody comes to me and they say, oh, like one of my biggest challenges is all this operations stuff. It's like, well, that's, not my sweet spot, but I've worked with all my clients to some extent on operations stuff, but it's not my sweet spot. And if that's really what you're looking for, I'm not going to be the right coach for you, right? Because where I really help people is. And hopefully you will have, one thing I encourage all you to have is clarity on like, what are the tenets of my program? Even if I'm a pure coach, I think it's really valuable, and you can take a look at my niche training if you want, because it's really about what's my sweet spot. And even if you're like a leadership coach, how do I stand out amongst all these leadership coaches? What's the body of work that I love? And what are some of the tenets I hold for that? You know, I was just working with a client on his tenets, and he was talking about like accountability and clear communication. And he has all these things that he holds a container for. He has tools and resources to help with that. But in the conversations themselves, he's very much a peer coach, right? So when you're in this conversation about creating clear value, having an illustration or a handout that has, you know, here's the 10, you know, this is, you know, even having a visual that says, here are the pillars of my program. Here's my philosophy when it comes to leadership, can really help in creating that clear value as well. Does that answer your question, Todd? Because I know it's, you know, it's not really our job to, at this point, it's like, what we want is to demonstrate the value we are as we move through this conversation, and making sure that our program or what we offer is really, you know, a great solution to that for the client. Let me know if you, okay, great. All right, so let's talk about next steps. So what if they're a good fit? So first of all, I would acknowledge them. You know, at some point you really want them to know that you would love, that you're leaning in, right? You just don't want to do that too soon because you want them to be leaning in with you. But once you feel them leaning in with you and you're having these resolution talks, you know, going through these questions, you really want them to know, because who doesn't want to work with somebody who doesn't want to work with them, right? It's like you want to work with somebody who is excited to work with you too. So, you know, first of all, acknowledge them for their vulnerability, for their sharing, for their willingness to show up fully for that conversation, and how much you're leaning in with them, and say, you know, I'd love to work with you. If it's a powerful yes for you, it's a powerful yes for me. As I said, keep asking the question, and only share your offers when they say it's a powerful yes for them, or yes, I want to, you know, I want to work together. Now, for most of you, your coaching, you know, your coaching is going to be a long-term relationship, and there is a way that our saboteurs do come in if we think about it too long. I usually recommend having about 48 hours. It doesn't always work out, right? They're going on vacation, or they're having offsite, or there's different things that are happening. But I also explain to them why, right? The farther you get from this, the farther you will get from it. And your saboteurs might even tell you it's not really important. But I do want you to think about it. You know, we don't want to, there's a lot of sales techniques out of there, like give them a discount if they say yes today. It's like, no, you really don't want someone to say yes if it's not a full body yes. And sometimes that happens in the moment, and they're like, I'm in, and you're like, great. And sometimes they say, you know, I just need to think about it overnight, or I need to talk to somebody about it, or I need to make sure I have the budget for it, all that stuff. So great. I think it's great that you want to think about it and do that, because this is a long-term relationship, and I don't want you to make a rash decision. And I encourage us to meet in the next 48 hours if possible, because the farther you get from this, the farther you'll get from this. And you probably already know on some level whether it's a yes or a no. And, you know, you really want to make sure you're honoring yourself in this decision. I would also encourage them to think about, I often give inquiries to people, and I'll send a follow-up with the inquiries to give them something to think about between now and next time. I encourage them to think about the questions that they still might have after thinking about it, and bring them to the conversation. Like I said, you know, let them know, like if they wait too long, they'll get far away from it. And if they do have to talk to somebody about it and they're feeling apprehensive, this is also an opportunity to coach them a little bit on how to have a powerful conversation and advocate for themselves, you know, whether it's to their boss or to their spouse or whomever, to have that conversation. And as I say, what if they pull the money card? because oftentimes people do. Like what I find is really interesting, and talking with all the various different clients I've had and the different coaches I have talked to over time, is that people pull the money card a lot when it actually isn't truly about money. So to have some questions, some follow-on questions, if they say, I'm not sure I have the money for this or the budget for this. It's a lot of money. I just don't know if it's worth that to me. You want to ask them some things to ascertain whether it's really about money or if it's about value, or if it's about something else, their own fears popping up or their commitment. So usually I ask, if it weren't for the money, would you move forward? And to really listen to the response with all of your senses, right? So if they say, absolutely, it's not about you or your program or your offer. It might actually really be about money. And then you can brainstorm with them possibly of how to overcome that as an obstacle. But oftentimes when people pull the money card and it's not really about money, they'll hesitate with this question. Or they'll say, yeah, sure I would, to get curious about that. Like, gosh, it doesn't really sound like that's a money issue to you. What is it really about? And first of all, this is showing that you are deeply listening. And sometimes that has people realize like, wow, this person will call me on my stuff, right? But essentially, I don't want you to believe that things are a money issue when it's not. And we really want to get to the heart of it, because part of this is for you to understand when clear value isn't there, because sometimes that means that there's work for you to do around your work and your client experience, especially if you're getting a lot of no's at this point from what you consider ideal clients. Then it's like, that's a place to get really curious. Like, okay, if ideal clients who I would love to work with keep giving me a no, what's the disconnect here? Because there's a lot, and that is not an easy question to answer. That probably takes some deep assessment to figure out what's really contributing to that. What does it cost you in terms of time, money, energy to do this? And what's the cost of not doing this? This is sometimes also when people are fearful about the commitment, for them to realize that they are going to waste a lot of time, money, and energy if they don't invest in themselves. And sometimes that epiphany really helps people who are a little fearful about spending the money, because they're afraid that they're not going to actually, there's a lot of people that fear that they're not really going to show up and really utilize this. Sometimes that's true with a capital T, and sometimes as a saboteur who's afraid. So it's a great opportunity to do some coaching, really, with those, depending on how they answer. Okay, look at that, right on time. So I'm going to put these links, by the way, in the chat so that you have those. But in terms of next steps, I want you to download my free guide to getting to a powerful yes, nailing your breakthrough sessions workbook. This will have everything that we talked about today, a little bit more about the money stuff. It will have a lot more sample questions that you could ask. So I encourage you to download and study that. And from that, I want you to build your own customized template. I also want to encourage you to sign up for a business breakthrough session. I'm going to give 4 slots out to this group. If more than 4 people raise their hand, I will decide who I think will benefit the most. I'll be sending a few questions to kind of ascertain that. And you'll get an experience on being on the receiving side of a breakthrough session. So surprise, surprise, what you'll experience in that is we'll spend about 30 minutes talking about where you are, where you want to be, and really examining that gap and looking at strategies to bridge that gap. And then if it feels resonant for you and I to continue talking and exploring about potentially working together, we'll spend more time. Otherwise, I will bless you on your journey, and I promise you'll walk away with value no matter what. And yeah, so I would encourage you to sign up. And I'm going to give 4 sessions, even if the people that sign up are brand new or have full-time jobs or people that are not my ideal clients. I love doing these. And I think that's one of the things I want to really stress with all of you is you got to love these. You got to love this enrollment process, because when you fall in love with it, that's when it's really magical. So it's one of my favorite things to do. I would do these all day long if I didn't have to earn a living. So I want to encourage you to do that. I put both links in the chat. And I want you to go build your own customized templates. And I want you to look around the room and find somebody else that you can role play this with and get feedback. One thing you'll discover is that even when you are not a master at this, it is still a beautiful experience for the person receiving it. And that is really powerful to know, that you don't have to be perfect to have it be really powerful. All right, so with that, I know that you have some other things to do in your breakout session. So thank you so much for having me today. If you have any questions that we weren't able to cover today, please reach out.
Yeah, Tara, just a couple of questions that came across in chat. One from Chris is, how or when do you construct the offer if what you have is a yes?
Okay, that's a really big question. So Chris, why don't you, I really don't want to take time away from the group, but why don't you follow up with me, and I'm happy to share it with you, Todd, if you want to share it with the group, but that's like a detailed thing. That's a lot of the body of the work that I do, but it's really depends on how much customization you do in your business versus, for most of my clients, they have, a few different ways that they work with people that they funnel people into. And even with organizations, they might even have sort of modules. So it's very easy for them to figure out scope. But it's a much, much larger question. So Chris, please reach out and I'll be happy to help you.
And another question might be more in depth, but from Mandy. So it's not a good idea to show package prices on your website? Question mark.
It's my philosophy is that it can, it's one of those things that can be a obstacle, because it really depends on who your ideal client is, first of all. But there is a huge, if you look at the ICF studies, there's a huge range of pricing for coaching. And so you risk having it come off as being too expensive. You risk having it come off as being too cheap. Now, I think you could talk about how you work with people, but I'm not a big fan of putting the money up on the website, because it might just be an obstacle for people for various different reasons. And you do not have to agree with me on that. Like, I really think it's always following your own resonance and what feels light and right.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Tara. That was so great. We much appreciate your time and energy and the information, and also the worksheet and stuff and offering that you're giving to us. So thank you very much. Stacy has put in the chat the